Please, all of you from wherever you're joining, take a moment to reflect on the ownership of the land that you are joining from today. And finally, I would like to acknowledge our esteemed First Nations nursing midwifery colleagues and others who are with us today, and leaders past, present and emerging. I especially wanted to welcome Professor Royanne West, who is the CEO of the Congress of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Nurses and Midwives. Royanne gave a wonderful lecture in August of this year, so the previous lecture to this. And just to remind you all that all of those lectures will be available, are available on the University of Sydney for public viewing, and as will this distinguished lecture as well. So just before I introduce our esteemed panelists, I just wanted to give you a brief introduction about the lecture series. For those of you who've been to it before, you will understand that we aimed to set out to collaborate with some of the brightest minds and distinguished leaders in nursing, midwifery and healthcare to discuss the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead for the nursing and midwifery professions. Little did we know that 2021 would be yet another year where we were not able to meet in person, but regardless, we have been absolutely privileged to share the inspirational insights and ideas that have come from our former speakers. Ideas for the advancement and possibilities for our own specialties, providing a vision for nursing and midwifery for the future. So we've hosted a total of 7 lectures, counting today's, over the year. And in this final Distinguished Nursing Lecture Series for 2021, our theme really comes from bidding farewell to 2 years of fires and floods, pandemics, and trying to look forward with hope. We know that the mental health and well-being of nurses and midwives and the broader communities that we live and work in has never been more critical for us to pay attention to. So today's panel, we will discuss with 2 distinguished nursing scholars of mental health to examine the importance of maintaining resilience and rebuilding community connectedness in the new world ahead. So the format for this morning will be, I will pose a number of questions to the panel members. Please feel free to use the Q&A function throughout if you wanted to ask something that you'll see that's just gone live now. I will ask the question if it's relevant to what the panelists are speaking about. Otherwise, there will be ample time at the end to answer the questions that you have. So now it is my very great pleasure to introduce our panelists. The first one, I suspect, well, I don't think need any introduction, but here is their official bios. First, it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Auntie Kerry Doyle. Auntie Kerry is the Associate Dean, Indigenous Health in Western Sydney University School of Medicine. She is a Winnenanee, Gadigal and Irish woman, and she was one of the first Indigenous women to graduate from Oxford University. Auntie Kerry is also the chair and research lead of the Aboriginal Health and Wellbeing Clinical Academic Group at Maradulu Pajari Gamal, which many of you will know is the Sydney Partnership for Health Education Research and Enterprise, hosted out of UNSW. She is a member of the Elders Circle for the Congress of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Nurses and Midwives, and a founding board member for the Narramura Indigenous Corporation. Professor Doyle has spent her career dedicated to improving outcomes for Australia's Indigenous population. Her research interests include cross-cultural education, applied cultural proficiency, the burden of disease, the social determinants of health, and Indigenous health and well-being. She has published extensively in academic journals, presented papers at national and international conferences, and co-authored book chapters on Indigenous issues. And we're very, very pleased to welcome her today. Our other panelist, Professor Kim Usher, I also suspect needs no introduction to many of you. Kim is an experienced academic and researcher with a commitment to co-designed and collaborative research that has a meaningful community and social justice impact. Recently, Kim has undertaken research and published on issues related to family violence, mental health, and the health of First Nation peoples. Kim is the lead researcher on a Medical Research Future Fund bushfire-funded grant to investigate the effect of arts-based storytelling workshops on mental health recovery after the Black Summer bushfires, and a New South Wales Health COVID-19 funded grant to explore the impact of COVID-19 on preventative health behaviours in First Nation communities. Professor Usher is also the New South Wales lead on an Australian Research Council grant on Aboriginal young persons' wellbeing and resilience, and a second lead investigator on another MRFF cardiovascular grant in conjunction with a team from the University of Newcastle. She's a current editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Mental Health Nursing, an editorial board member of the Journal of Advanced Nursing and Journal of Clinical Nursing, and has published over 300 peer-reviewed papers and supervised more than 40 PhD students to date. She's a frequently invited PhD examiner, a fellow of both the Australian College of Mental Health Nurses and the Australian College of Nursing. And along with Professors Deborah Jackson, Patricia Davidson, and Kim has recently released a new book this month on PhD supervision. Welcome to you, Kim. So lovely to have you both here with us. So I'm going to start, I guess, at the very broad global type of question. To you, Auntie Kerry, perhaps if you can start with this one. It's fair to say that there's been quite a lot going on in our world over the last 18 months. In Australia, we know that as a country, we have our fair share of droughts and flooding rains causing these last 2 years in particular, devastating fires, loss of homes and livelihoods, isolation and uncertainty. It feels for a lot of people like there is some level of threat or trauma just always under the surface. Auntie Kerry, what do you think are some of the most significant challenges for the well-being of our communities looking into the future?
I think thanks for that question, Professor Donna. I think one of the greatest challenges for Indigenous communities anyway is not only social inclusion, but community and cultural inclusion. And because of people are not able to travel back to homelands or indeed travel to even to the AMSs, I think that has been an issue for us anyway, that's caused no small amount of distress. I know that it's unfortunate to say that in the areas that we look to, we've had an increase in young men completing suicide, and again also the deferral, if you like, of medical treatment for people with chronic diseases. So I think when you're sick, you know you're sick, and if you know that you're not going to be able to access treatment, that just compounds the issue. Yeah.
Kim, what about you? What do you think is going to be some of the significant challenges for the future?
Thank you, Professor Waters, and I want to thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel today, and also to recognise Auntie Kerry Doyle. I'd also like to just recognise that I come to you today from Anaiwan land, and that also the Gamilaroi and Darugee people have also a connection to this land. So given the number of events, as Auntie Kerry's just said, there's been a compounding effect for people. One of the local communities that I do some volunteer work in they had drought, the impact of the drought, then fires that decimated their community. They lost almost all of the homes, and then floods, and then COVID. So one lady said to me one day when I was there, first we had the drought, many people left, then came the fires, 3 fires. We lost almost all of the homes in the community in the last fire, and also 2 lives. And then came the floods, and now we have COVID. What next? So you can see the compounding effect of these have been quite traumatic across many areas. I think also, for farmers in this region, they've experienced significant losses due to the drought and now the floods. For many, they were just getting back on their feet. The losses have been too great for some and they've walked away. Others have destocked. And now, because of the high prices of cattle and sheep, they can't restock. So we have farms left idle. Mm-hmm. But I think the important thing is that we have to spend time to, as Auntie Kerry said, reconnect and then find ways to move forward. And that's going to be so important for the future. We have children who've experienced quite serious issues in many cases. So children in particular from lower socioeconomic backgrounds have had to try and do their schooling at home with often no internet access or with limited digital technologies. We've also seen children at greater risk of violence than we have before. And so those effects are going to impact children way into the future. Yeah, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. And hopefully we can pick up that the reconnection theme a little bit later as well. So I'm interested to know if either of you feel that, I guess I'm a glass half full person. These horrible life events that have been happening to people, do you think it's made attention to mental health and well-being more obvious to the community? Do you think when media portray these things, are they also being helpful in a sense of connecting people, recognising the impact on well-being, people's livelihoods and so on, or do you think it's been less so? I'm interested in how you feel that's kind of played out in terms of raising community awareness. Either of you can start.
Well, I'm happy to begin if you like. So I think
yes,
in many ways people have become more comfortable about talking about issues, not just mental health issues, but all sorts of social issues. And what we've seen is a flurry of activity on internet sites like Twitter and Facebook and other TikTok and so forth, where people are actually talking about some of the serious issues that they're experiencing as a result of COVID. And one of the things that we've done recently with some colleagues who are in the room today is we looked at a study of the mentions of domestic violence on Twitter in Australia since the start of the pandemic. And the analysis of that showed us that there has been quite a rise in the number of reports of domestic violence tweets, and that people that were posting were majority female in the 18 to 34 age bracket. Most were listed as also being parents. And the overall sentiment was quite negative. And the negative sentiment was around potentially the issue of the greater number of domestic violence incidents during lockdown, and also with a focus on gender-based violence. And people were feeling that the financial crisis and the stress that people are experiencing is actually driving or fueling domestic violence. So I think that there are issues that show us that people are actually more able to, speak openly about things like that. But I also agree with you that there seems to be more, I guess I wouldn't say comfort, but recognition of the impact of mental health as a result of the recent events in our community.
Yeah, I think that's good, but I suppose, unless that awareness is coupled with what do people, where do they go then? So if something is on Twitter, for example, it's raising awareness. And then as long as that is, in my mind, coupled with if you've got a problem, where can you go? Then that's the sort of complete circle. Professor Doyle, would you like to comment on this?
Thank you. I think for Indigenous people, the challenge is to be able to spread a message without using it from a deficit perspective. One of the biggest issues that we're dealing with in the work that we do is the increase in gambling in Indigenous communities as a function of the stress of COVID, the disease factors itself, but also people who've lost their jobs, etc. And why do people gamble, and why is it a toxic level of gambling is one of the issues that we're looking at, especially during COVID. So I think as long as the message, because we were very integral working with the Commonwealth Department of Health to look at how you promote vaccine uptake in Indigenous communities where there was such a high level of hesitancy, how you can get that across from a strength-based approach using local elders, etc. And I think that's what's really important with any media program is that you just avoid that deficit approach of this is what you need to be doing.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, thanks for that. Okay, well,
I wonder if I could just add there, I think also that there has been recognition in other ways of the importance of the long-term impact for mental health, and I believe the government is starting to recognise that and put funding into different areas and allow things like telehealth appointments, for mental health consultations and so forth. So we have seen a change in that area.
yes, yeah, that is true.
And then there's been a recognition through funding that's been made available to look at some of the mental health impacts of things like bushfires and floods and other things like that, and specifically from a local perspective. And I think that's what we need to look at for services in the future, is ensuring that our services are place-based.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to bring us a bit more into our professions now with my next question, because poor lifestyle behaviours and mental health conditions are often reported as being higher in nurses and other health professionals. And I know both of you have done extensive work in this area. And I was reading recently that without considering any of the recent personal stresses felt by nurses and midwives as members of their usual work, caring, cultural communities, burnout, stress, anxiety, and depression have been reported as affecting between 50 and 65% of clinicians, which is somewhat staggering. Wellbeing focuses on all aspects of health and wellness, as we know, but there doesn't really seem to be a lot of support for some types of wellness among clinicians. I mean, there's attention to perhaps physical things, but there is also the mental, financial, professional, intellectual, social, all of those types of wellbeing. My next question is really about your reflecting back on your own careers. Can you tell us a little bit about what was your personal experience? How did you feel supported in terms of your mental health and wellbeing as you came through your nursing careers and into academia and the other roles that you've played? And do you think it's got better? Kim, would you like to start?
Thank you. That's a tricky question. I think when I was early on in my career as a nurse, I did feel quite supported, and that was a really good period. I enjoyed being a mental health nurse in particular. And it was, I have some of the best memories, I think, of my life from back in those early times. And then I moved into academia, and early on in my academic life, I did mostly feel very well supported and cared, that I had employers who cared about me and did the best by me. I did have a period of time more recently where I didn't feel very well supported in my role, and that was sort of hard to get through, but I did get through it, and obviously now I feel, I'm very happy where I'm at with my own work. But I think that some of the things that have happened for me during COVID have been the feelings of being possibly, you feel at home alone, or that you're working alone in a room. You only see people through a computer screen, and so that can become a bit daunting. And for me, I sort of got to a point where I felt like my whole world had imploded, and I was just my world was an office. So I had to sort of change my ways, and I realised then that what I needed to do was to take a period of time every day where I actually went outside and just enjoyed being out in the world, and that seems to have helped a lot. So I think there's a story to tell in all of our
Yeah, thank you. Auntie Kerry?
Well, I started nursing in a general hospital when I was 16, and I think I was too scared to say anything. And, people thought I had selective mutism for the first 3 years, I think. So, but I think the development of CAT-SNAM, and I do acknowledge Roy Ann's here today, that's been 25 years, and I think that's been a great support for a lot of us. And when I talk to the other members of CAT-SNAM, I notice that is the same thing. And I think moving into academia can be challenging, and I know that, and that's why I'm Auntie Kerry. Like I have a couple of new academics this year, and I make sure that I really support them and grow them, because some people have said to me, oh, you have to do this all by yourself. Nobody helped me, so I'm not helping you. And I don't believe that for a second. I think that it's all hands on deck, especially for our nursing colleagues who may come from an area of lateral violence, that we need to make sure that they're safe and they're promoted, and that we grow them, because they're our best hope. But I do know also in the big lockdown that we had, there was a big shout out for, because I always think, well, I'm too old to really contribute anything clinically, but I still work clinically because I'm addicted to it and I just love helping people. But I went to do 2 12-hour shifts in a dementia ward with full PPE on, and I came out looking like some horrible war veteran. And but the support from the other nurses was really good. You know, I think people were saying, try this when you put your mask on so that you don't end up with that horrible rash, etc., etc. And it's the small things that nurses do to and for each other that make the biggest difference.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I wonder then, why is it that, so on the floor, or, you know, in those situations, we support each other, and yet, as I say, we still have these study after study coming out talking about, you know, this stress and the depression and anxiety. So is it a workplace thing? Is it our jobs? Is it, what do you think? Where's that coming from, do you think?
Well, I know when I was a nursing unit manager at the great and wonderful Wyong Hospital, we had a waiting list of nurses to come there. And I think that if you this might be controversial, but I think if you want to be a manager, you need to have a good role model, and you need to have some professional and identifiable learning around that. So, you know, we give you a job because you're really good at whatever you are clinically, but now we need you to be really good in leadership. And like, we had a dolphin program, so when new nurses came, we would, you know, make them all squeal like dolphins. Sounds pathetic when I say it out loud, but, you know, people would be really happy to come, and I would give people buddies, etc. And that's what we need. We need all nurses everywhere to recognise that we're all in this together, you know, and rather than when I go onto a ward, well, we're just putting out a paper that says where students prefer to go is where the nurses are happiest to work. Because when you're happy at your work, you're less likely to be that lamboidal, eating your young, bullying kind of thing, or that I didn't get, you know, treated very well when I was a student, so why should I treat students very well? I've heard students called slaves, or this is my slave for the day, and I really find that, you know, irksome. So that's what I think. If we celebrate and promote more congeniality and more leadership training for our beginning clinical leaders, I think that will go a long way to, I think anyway, got no evidence. So, you know, it's just, you know, no, sorry.
And I just follow on from there. I worked in both general and mental health nursing environments, and I always found the general nursing environment much more stressful. I could probably guess at a few reasons why, but I won't talk about those today. But so I really wasn't very stressed in the mental health nursing environment. That was a great place to work. I enjoyed it immensely. What I'm concerned about now are our nursing students across Australia. And we've just completed a study and analysed the results of the mental health impact of COVID on nursing students. And we've been overwhelmed ourselves as we've read the comments. So we have a lot of very distressed students out there about the uncertainty, about for them, for now, for the future, stressed about the changes to the learning environment, stressed about the changes to clinical, where, you know, they may fear that they could be having to care for infectious patients, or in situations where they might take the infection home to their families. And they're also very distressed about their employability for the future, because they're worried that they'll be entering the workforce without the required level of skills to be competent to practice. So I think this is a serious problem, given that we face a major shortage of registered nurses in the future in this country.
Yes, and that they're starting their career already feeling anxious and distressed is not a good place to start. We have a question. from an audience member, Deborah. The question is, what advice would you have for a new nurse, as in a new nurse academic, or either a new nurse or a new nurse academic? What advice would you give them?
I don't know about what advice I'd give them. Look, I have to say, I've said this a number of times lately, that when I see the stress that nurse academics are under now, especially level Bs and Cs, I don't think I'd choose to be a nurse academic anymore if I was starting out. So I don't know how they manage the workload that they're given. I see the staff that I work with, here, and I don't know how they keep going. I really don't. It's a very stressful place to work at the moment. So I think it's very hard, but I guess to say, give them some advice if you're starting out as an academic, to surround yourself with good people, like-minded people who are going to help you out, and not, people that you can trust to have your back. And that's important. You've got to have, not necessarily be friends with everybody, find a few good colleagues. They might not even be the people where you work. And once you've got those few strong allies, you can pretty well get through anything. That's what I find. I rely very heavily on a few very good colleagues that I've worked with in my career for many years now, and I stick with those people.
Yeah, okay, that's good advice. Professor Doyle, your advice?
I like the idea that CATSNAM has of mentors and mentoring, so that if you've come into any new position, quickly join the organisation that's going to support you better, or wherever you are. I'm a mentor for the new Indigenous academics in nursing. We have 2 at Western at the moment, and I think that really makes a difference, because people will, I don't want to say pick on you, but people will spotlight you, and you will be expected to be the knower of all knowledge. And we all know there's only ever been one person on this planet who knew everything, and that was my mother. Thanks for laughing, Kim.
I think you're very correct there, and mentorship is very important, and I think that's important to get the right mentor as well, and also I think for people who work in academia, we need strong heads of school who've got good leadership qualities, but also who see the good things in people, because it's always very easy to take a sort of negative approach to leadership and want to check everybody and everything they do. Whereas I always took the approach that people come to work to do the right thing, and that we shouldn't intervene unless we find evidence of something else. And most people just, if you trust them to do it, they do their job, they do it well. And then, so I always used to really try and make sure that I gave a really good mentor to a new person as well, because that's very important, from making sure that they're not exploited as they go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Okay, I'm getting a few questions into the Q&A now. One of them actually relates to our next question. So what I might do is move on to that one first. I'm aware of the other questions there, and I'll come to those in a moment. Really, I guess this is, you've already started to touch on this, and one of the question from Lynn was about saying that nursing students and nursing academics she feels that in general are pretty resilient. But are there some tips for increasing that resilience for our academics and students? And before you answer that, I just want to, if I may, put it in the context of the question I was going to ask, because nurses and midwives sit as a workforce, but also members of communities, and thinking about the role they play is not just as a health professional, but many have strong leadership roles in their own communities as well. So the question, similar to Lynn's, that I had is just about how do you maintain resilience and self-care through these times? Particularly, you're talking before, Kim, about that reconnection and the fact that there's not just one thing. It's not having resilience for one thing. It's about on top of, you know, this kind of compound effect of one thing on top of the other and on top of the other. And so resilience is such an easy word to say, but it's when it's at all of those levels. So this is probably a hard question to answer, but I wonder perhaps if you could just start by telling us a little bit about how you think people can maintain their resilience and self-care. So Auntie Kerry, would you like to start this time?
Sure. So I think to recognise your own resilience, you need to be able to have that ability to self-reflect, and nurses push this a lot. You know, we talk about the self-reflection ladder a fair bit, and I think recognising when your stress is can be really challenging, because you just continually run down that road until you're at the end of your shift, because trying to do the best you can. But so when you're recognising that you feel as though you're not achieving anything, that your personal accomplishment levels are down, that when you go home you don't want to talk to people, these are signs and symptoms that you need, that you're getting burnt out, and burnout is one of the issues that really threaten resilience. So it's the ability to be able to recognise it. It's the ability to be able to go and talk to someone, preferably a manager, and say, like when I was managing a hospital, I would say to the ED staff, if you want to rotate out for a couple of months to another ward, then that's fine too, because those high stress areas where you have to get everything right the first time, ED and day surgical wards are probably the two that everybody would be most familiar with. You need to be able to recognise that's an added stressor to all the other nursing activities that people do. So recognising it in yourself, being able to talk to a manager who understands, and finding ways to manage that. The other advice I would say is, you know, eat chocolate.
Yes. Excellent.
So yeah, I agree with all that Barney Kerry said. It's very important, and do things that make you feel good. But we need to unload the negative side of resilience. So you've got like a balance. So we just need to really do a check-in for ourselves and say, you know, what are the stressors? What can I take off this side that's a bit overloaded at the moment? So good things to do are to, you know, just take some time out for yourself, try something new that you've not done before. Also be confident enough to ask for help when it's needed. Check in with others, make sure they're okay, maintain your connections with friends and family. Don't let those connections slip. And when we can go out, I think it's good to take advantage of that and do new things. Join a new group, or do something you've not done before. If you've not been someone who goes to the theatre, go to the theatre, or just do something that pushes you beyond the boundary and into something new. And we've, as you know, people have started turning a lot to other things of recent times, and craft has become one of them. And the craft industry sales have boomed. Pet industries skyrocketed, people spending lots of money on pets. So they're things that people are doing to try and help themselves, and they're good things, and they're actually good opportunities to do different things and make our life better.
Yeah, thank you very much, both of you. I think one of the amazing things about that is that they are actually, many of those are simple things, aren't they, that all people can do. And I think people, you know, think they've got to do something amazing or pay money for something, or, you know, but actually all of those suggestions are, you know, most of them anyway, are free in many ways and able to be accessed by most people. So I have a couple of questions for you now, so we might move into those. And but before I do that, I would like to say also there's lots of support on the chat for both of you, and also gratefulness, particularly. So Rhonda has applauded your leadership, Kim, in helping you in her career. So it's very nice. So here's a controversial, well, I think a controversial question from Kelly. Kelly was a student of nursing, but she has decided to take a break because of COVID. What Kelly's written is that she said, I feel that a lot of the problems with nursing stem from having the bulk of the learning done at a university instead of a hospital setting. If the students are still in the hospitals, it would have possibly helped to take a bit of the stress off the established RNs. The students could do a great deal of the basic patient care and take some of the pressure off the RNs. What do you both think about that?
Well, I'll try and tackle that. I think that's a very good comment, and thank you for that. I'm sorry that you've made that choice, but I certainly support you in doing so. And I do hope you return to nursing, because nursing has been a very good career choice for me. It's taken me all over the world. I've worked for the World Health Organization, International Council of Nurses. You know, it's just been, and I've worked in the whole Pacific and Asia area doing all sorts of exciting things. So don't give up on nursing. But I agree in some ways. I don't think the education system as it is at present is as good as it could be. And I certainly support the fact that having more time in clinical would be something that would be very supportive for students and very helpful. However, I don't think we should think that the old days, just because the way they were glory days. I can assure you I was put in many situations during my training, particularly general nurse training, where I didn't know what I was doing. And so we were really working and putting patient safety at risk. And so that's the thing we certainly don't want to see happen again. And we were often sending blind. I remember one time saying to the charge nurse, I don't know how to do this. And she said, go into the clinical room and read the book on how to do it and go and do it. That was it. That was her answer. So I would hope we never put students through that sort of stress again. But I certainly agree that there are situations where things could be done better, in particular around clinical and the organisation of clinical, opportunities for clinical and so forth. So it's a really good question. Thank you. And certainly hope you do decide to return.
Did you want to add anything, Auntie Kerry?
I do, thanks. It's the amount of time for accreditation for a nursing degree is 800 hours. You must do 800 clinical hours, and some universities will even fudge around that. But how did anybody arrive at that magical number? New Zealand has 1,200. If you to look to America, each state has its own different thing. It was, and the hours keep coming down because it's expensive. It's expensive for a school to place a student. Not that that's an excuse, but it does mean that you need to have more clinically oriented opportunities while one is a student, in your clinical labs or however you do that. And I think there's a lot of really good work occurring around virtual hospital wards to compensate, especially over COVID when we couldn't set people out. But I don't like the idea of students being used as ward fodder, if you like, to backfill where nurses should be. I think student nurses have a role of being able to be taught by ward nurses, and I think that's an important thing. And if you're going to do undergrad sort of stuff, then they should be paid. We should be paying them. We did this with doctors. Over the last 2 years, when we didn't have enough doctors, we started the AIMS project, which was assisted in medicine, and sent out our 4th and 5th years and paid them, to work night shift, etc. So,
yeah, yes. Just add to that, I think that the important thing to remember as well is that we go back, to the times when nurses who were hospital trained marched in the streets demanding higher education for nurses. So they realised that nurses need to be highly qualified, well-educated, highly skilled people. So we deserve as nurses to have the same level of education as other people in the health professions, doctors, physios, occupational therapists, social workers. So we deserve that. We deserve that as nurses. The problem is the government is reluctant to pay adequately for nursing education in this country, and that's where we run into a problem. When I was first head of school at James Cook University many years ago, the amount we received per student per year was not much less than what it is today, all those years later. So that's where the problem is. And whenever we've tried to have an extra year for nursing and have a more clinical focused final year, when I was chairing the Council of Deans, the government would say to us, well, you can do it, but we won't pay you for it.
Yes, and it's exactly the same conversations that we have today. So that has not changed, sadly. If I may also just add, Kelly, I think there was some really good movement during the COVID pandemic this year, particularly, I'm not sure about other states, but I know in New South Wales, the chief nurse was very active in trying to commence the program that Auntie Kerry just mentioned that is equivalent in doctors, so assistants in medicine. Because as you know, a lot of nursing students work as assistants in nursing, in their paid job as well. But what they were trying to do in the ministry was to permit a special category. So they actually created a new category of worker in the health system for nursing students. And it was based on the model of the assistant in medicine. I think it's been created and it's there. I think the thing is that the kind of pandemic started to peter out before a lot of people actually got the chance to do it. So I think there is some movement in that area for opportunities. But as I couldn't agree more with both of the panelists and certainly Auntie Kerry in terms of being paid for the work you do. Is really important to have it recognised that way. Now, please send your questions in. They're coming in thick and fast now, so panellists, get ready. The next question comes from Kate White, Professor Kate White. She's written, we often focus on leadership and management skills, but I wonder, how do we support kindness and recognise the importance of this?
I'll take that.
Thanks, Auntie Kerry.
So we've done some research on an Indigenous form of leadership, and I'm happy to send that chapter around to anybody who is interested. But it really does privilege attitudes, and if you look at Bloom's taxonomy, you can know everything about leadership, and you can have the skills even to manage someone, but it's the attitudes and behaviours of a leader that really make a successful leader. So if you've got someone who's really into the power of it all, they're not going to be a good leader.
No, I'd certainly agree with that. And it takes such a little effort to be kind, to be nice to people, to be pleasant. And really, if you haven't got something nice to say about people, I think you should say nothing at all. And if you're having a really bad day, you should go home. Because good leaders they're engaging. They want their followers to be happy, because a happy team is going to be a productive team. So I think it's a very important part of leadership, and I agree.
And my boss, Anne-Marie Hennessy, talks especially about being COVID kind, and her motto is be kind and have courage. And that's what she enjoins all of her associate deans to do. And I think that especially during COVID, it's really important.
That's lovely. Thank you. Bethany asks, do nurses have good access to mental health supports and resources in their workplaces? And if not, what should these be? Kim, would you like to start with that one?
Well, I think we all do have, pretty good access now to things through our employers. And that's one thing I would say has really improved during the times of the pandemic since it began, is that there's been much more attention by employers on ensuring that there are those opportunities for students at universities as well as staff. So from a university perspective, I could say, yes, we have very good access. I'm not as sure about the clinical nurses, but I do think there are always a lot of opportunities in the community for people to access. So unfortunately, in rural areas, not so much for local people. And I'm a community member of the Primary Health Network board, and unfortunately, in some rural areas, there's quite delays for community members to get access to mental health services.
Yeah, so interesting. I might go to another question here from Camille. So a lot of people say, I think this was a comment question related to resilience, I think, but it ties in with what you're talking about now, is accessing. A lot of people say they don't have time to do these things. The suggested ideas, how do we coach our colleagues to make the time to seek help? Camille says that I'm from the UK and I work in higher education, and we have had very, very similar issues. So I think this is a step behind saying, here are the things we can do, kindness, resilience, and so on. How do we make the time for those. Any thoughts on that, either of you?
Well, I'll just say it's like, you know, I have to talk to my PhD students about this as well, particularly those who are doing their PhD part-time. And one student spoke to me just recently, and I said, well, it is about looking at your life and making choices. We all have to make choices, and we have to live by those choices. So you make the choice to put some time aside to work on your PhD, which then, as he said, made him feel better when he does achieve. So I said, if that makes you feel better, then putting the time aside should be an easy choice. You have to make a choice. So it's about choices in life, choices whether you want to be happy, whether you want to be resilient. And I know time's difficult and we're all time poor, but we have to make time for ourselves. It's like saying, I'm here and I've got a balanced role as a teacher, researcher and service, but I don't have time to do research. Well, it's the same as when who you are. You've got commitments to your family, you've got commitments to work, you've got commitments to yourself. And I think that's something we all have to learn to manage better.
Yeah, thank you. Did you want to add anything, Auntie Kerry?
Just that the New South Wales Nurses Association will say that you're allowed to go in your work time, and so will the NTU.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yes, okay. So we are rapidly running out of time, and this has been absolutely fascinating, and thank you both. So if anybody has a burning question, the time to ask it is now. I have had a couple of people on the chat and the Q&A ask if you wouldn't mind sharing your chapter that you referred to,
Sure.
Kerry, if that's okay. There's lots of chats coming in now about saying thank you to you all, and you'll be able to see these wise and generous, thanking you for your wise and generous insights. As we come to the last, okay, now there's one question here. This is for Professor Usher. Someone wants to know what your show ribbons are for in the background.
Very important.
Very important to mental health and well-being.
They are. So they're show ribbons for my red poll cattle. I have a small stud of red poll cattle, and I try and breed to improve the breed, and I take them to shows. And so those ribbons there are from 2019 when we won the Supreme exhibit at the Sydney Royal with one of our homebred red poll bulls. And then there was no show in 2020 due to COVID.
Yes.
And so we were lucky enough to get back to the Sydney Royal this year. And we took another homebred young bull, only a junior bull. And he also went from the junior bull class right through and won Supreme exhibit again. So
excellent.
We're
very good. Congratulations. Oh, well, I'm sure that keeps you well as well. Okay, in our last 10 minutes, what I'm going to do is ask each of our panelists if they could leave us with one message, one affirming message with our audience about, you know, what do you think is important for people to know and understand to be well as they approach 2022. Professor Usher, would you like to start?
Thank you. Well, I think it's important to remember that as a result of the COVID pandemic, life has changed and our lives have changed. And I think that it will have changed forever. So the post-COVID world and communities will be different than they ever were before. In the previously, we used to spend a lot of time out going to community events and things like pubs and clubs and restaurants and so forth. That's called the third space. As a result of COVID, the third space has changed. So we've found new ways as a community to bring our events or the third space into the inline area. So we've seen families linking up, eating dinner together through Zoom and having a family celebration where people might be across 10 different living rooms. We've found ways where we've started to do exercise on using the TV or Zoom spaces spending a lot more time online with cooking classes, craft sessions and things like that. We've actually been doing craft sessions online as part of a project we're doing. And more people have been working from home, and I believe that companies and employers will realise that it's an okay thing for people to work at home. They actually still do achieve. And also working at home helps reduce carbon emissions, which can be, help to reduce the negative consequences of climate change. So look, I'd really like to encourage people to embrace these changes and make them part of their new future and see it as a positive rather than a negative, because I think we can use this new, way of living and make it a positive way of living. And just as a final thing about resilience, I think we always need to remember that resilience is not just about being strong. Resilience is it's not even about staying on your feet. It's about being able to get back up after you've been knocked down and then to keep going. That's what resilience is. And I'm sure that our community that's here today will all be able to do that.
Thank you so much. Professor Doyle.
So thank you. It's been an honour to be with Professor Kim and yourself, Professor Donna, and the others. I guess I would say it's the 3 C's of COVID. So the first is connection. So you need to be connected somehow to a community that you can belong to, either virtually or in person. The second C would be consideration. You need to be able to consider not only your workmates, but the people who live around you. I know my son, who is also, to my great pride, a nurse. Make sure that all the old people who live around here are really well looked after and fed, and he has created a connection with an old Chinese lady who recently lost her husband, and he goes up there and does her lawn and does stuff. I don't know what they speak to each other because she can't speak English and he doesn't speak Chinese, but it's just the consideration of being a good neighbour in your workplace and in your home spaces as well. And third C is kindness. Yeah, I know it's okay. We need to be kind to ourselves and we need to be kind to each other.
Wonderful.
And nurses are good at that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And we need to remember how good we are at it, I think. Well, at this point, I want to offer my sincere thanks to Kim and Auntie Kerry. It's just been a fascinating conversation, and your insights as distinguished nurses and exceptional academics is very much appreciated. I want to thank the audience too, and for your participation in the questions. It really has just been wonderful. As we finish, I hope you don't mind in giving me a last word, in giving thanks and paying my respects to those in our professions who've helped keep us safe during the year. And I want to wish all of you a very safe and happy holiday season and a wonderful, peaceful, resilient year in 2022. So I'm just going to read from this now. It is possible that the recording may stop during this, but don't be concerned. Thank you all very much, everybody, and especially to our wonderful panelists. So I'm reading you a dedication from the Future of Nursing report, which is obviously a US report, but it applies to nursing globally. And in the front of the report, it says, this report is dedicated to the nurses around the world who paid the ultimate price of caring for people during the COVID-19 crisis of 2020-2021. Hundreds of nurses lost their lives and many thousands became sick themselves. And those who escaped the physical symptoms of the illness did not necessarily escape the physical and mental toll of working long hours in grueling circumstances, sometimes without proper personal protective equipment. Their dedication and persistence in the face of adversity saved countless lives. They were also there to ease the suffering of the dying with a hand held, a song sung, or a video call to loved ones. For them, we look to the future of nursing to help ensure that what happened to the nursing profession this year and those in their care, especially the disadvantaged and people of colour, becomes an event of the past. Thank you all very much for what's been a really fascinating conversation. And as I say, I wish you all well. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. Bye.